your Sunday Morning Lion with Mike Shaft.
BBC Radio Manchester.
Well, if I told you that people were turning up at churches in Greater Manchester at 2 o'clock in the morning to ask for food because they couldn't afford to feed their family, you might think it was a scene from a Dickens novel. It's not. It's happening right here in 2013 under our noses. This week saw the publication of a report by the Greater Manchester Poverty Commission, chaired by the Bishop of Manchester. The report was based on the real testimonies of people living in our city and found that 600,000 people in Greater Manchester are living in poverty. This morning we're going to discuss that report in detail with Colin Barson, a parish development officer for the Manchester Diocese, who was one of the commissioners, and Adrian Nottingham, the CEO of Mustard Tree, a Christian charity that works with homeless people and those in need in Greater Manchester. A very good morning to you, gentlemen.
Morning.
Thank you very much indeed for taking time to be with us. Now, Colin, can I first clear this up? That figure of 600,000, is that correct?
It is correct. I mean, there's a whole bunch of figures from the quantitative data analysis that we've done as a commission over the last 12 months. There's some more startling figures, something like 91,000 children in severe poverty in Greater Manchester. Something like even 137,000 people who are actually in work poverty. So these are people who are actually in work, earning a living, and are still in poverty due to the lack of wages that they're receiving. So the poverty is very widespread, and there's some very serious numbers in Greater Manchester.
Why do you think it was important to do this research?
I think it was important because I think Greater Manchester is a very important area in the United Kingdom. It also has some very specific problems from the 1950s when there was clearances of housing in East Manchester, North Manchester, down into the suburbs. They took some of the poverty issues with them, and poverty is a long-standing issue in Britain. I mean, I can give you quotes from the 1840s, 1880s, where poverty was serious in Britain. We don't seem to have moved very far. So I think it was important to do this piece of research at a qualitative and quantitative level to actually really try to understand the way that people live their lives in the UK today, and especially in Greater Manchester, where there are specific issues.
This took a year of your life. What was the process like?
It did take a year of my life, and I have to say it was very difficult in parts. Some of the emotional things that occurred at some of the events were quite hard to deal with, but I think the commissioners as a whole have been a really motivated and aspirational group of people. But what the process was that we made a decision very early on that we wanted to look at the qualitative nature of poverty. We wanted to really understand people's stories, to actually be able to empathise really with those stories, so that we could then take that message, their voices, to other places to try to reduce the poverty we've got. So we had a series of events across Greater Manchester where we invited testimony from people in poverty. In addition to those events, we had some specific events, but we also asked for testimonies from about 120 organisations operating across Greater Manchester within the charity, the faith and the voluntary community sector, who deal with people on a daily basis. And then in addition to that, we mapped that with the actual quantitative data from the indices of multiple deprivation, etc., to try and create a holistic report that gave the emotion of poverty, but also the statistical evidence, and then to come up with some recommendations that we felt that we could start to put in place to try and ameliorate some of the issues people face in our country.
Final question for now. Were you shocked by the results?
I'm quite old now, so I don't tend to get shocked, but I was surprised really about the numbers. I wasn't particularly surprised or shocked by the emotion. I think I do empathise quite well, and I understand poverty, but there's no doubt there's a lot of people very sad, very isolated and fearful for the future in this city of ours, and we need to start to rebuild some of the trust and connect people with their neighbourhoods and communities, because if we don't, I really fear that we're going to have social unrest.
Colin, back with you in a few moments' time. Adrian Nottingham, CEO of Mustard Tree. You've seen a rise in the number of people coming to you for help. What sort of problems have they been coming to you with?
So the essential crisis issues of food, clothing, setting up home. We welcome this report. The numbers are illuminating. They just help to explain what we're seeing on a daily basis. So the number of people coming to us for crisis food is a great indice. It helps us to understand. In November of 2011, the Mustard Tree, which is just one of the several agencies working in this area across Greater Manchester, in November of 2011, we gave out 90 food parcels. So that's crisis, a food package, 3 to 5 days of food for somebody who cannot feed themselves or their family. 2011, 90. November 2012, 12 months later, 195. So over twice the number. And I guess that's catches something of the crisis intervention that agencies like the Mustard Tree are facing every single day.
Are you able to cope with this rise in demand?
We are, but the reality is it is stretching our resources and our capacity to the point where if things really don't change, if there is not a fundamental change in the way that we're able to gain resources ourselves, then we will, like I think many others, reach a breaking point, certainly in this coming year.
But if it continues to rise in the same way it rose in the last 12 months, you're talking about a phenomenal amount of resources needed to cover that, aren't you?
Yes, we are. And I think we have to bear in mind that this is actually happening prior to April of this year, when we know that some very, very real changes in welfare benefits and housing benefits, etc., are coming down the line to us. So we're already seeing a growth in the need of the services that we provide prior to April. So we just know that something has to change, something has to be done. A new way of working has to be found.
Okay, let's talk about a new way of working. What would you recommend if the Prime Minister was in here listening to you?
Well, can I give you a story, Mike? Because it always helps. It helps me to focus. Just before Christmas, at our Eccles Mustard Tree branch, somebody arrived at our door who had been referred from the Stretford Job Centre, and he had walked from the Stretford Job Centre to Eccles, to the Mustard Tree in Eccles, for an emergency food parcel to feed his family. And then he had to walk back into Stretford. And what that tells me is that there are two things happening. One is there's a need for increased funding for crisis, but at the same time, which is what the Mustard Tree and other agencies do, we need to address long-term as well. What we have to do is address both. We can talk about long-term changes, and those are clear. We need to do that. We need to look at the causes for this, and this report really sets out some very clear recommendations, which I wholeheartedly embrace. And we need to be putting into place strategies to deal with the long term, but we also need to find a way of increasing funding to crisis intervention services as well.
Colin, what would you say to the Prime Minister if he was sitting here?
I think I would say to the Prime Minister that we have to view poverty in a very different way. And I suppose I agree with what Adrian said, but I think the nature of poverty is very, very personal to people, and I don't think people always notice that it is personal. We talk about statistics, and I don't want to quote Stalin really, but I will. And he allegedly said, that one death is a tragedy, a million is a statistic. I honestly believe that the people of this country see poverty as a statistic and not as something that's very, very personal to those human beings that are involved. So what I'd want to do is to ask Mr. Cameron to spray some magic dust on our nation and start to think in empathetic terms about people, to actually really feel and understand how people are when they are in poverty, to feel the fear, the isolation and the frustration quite often that people are in fear. I think if we had a change of mindset, I think that would trigger a change in how we deliver services to those who are not so well off, and how we actually coordinate that. So with the goodwill of people understanding the nature of poverty and what poverty really is at a personal level, to actually bring in and developing services that actually meet people's needs. And the people who know what their needs are those people who are in poverty, and those are the people that we ask not very often. And so I think it's a case of understanding poverty, what it is at a personal level, and then, as Adrian said, actually coordinating services for where they're actually in need, so we don't have people walking from Stretford to Eccles and back again, because that's just ridiculous. When, you know, I think there's a report out earlier this week that 66% of the food that farmers produce in our country goes to waste. That's absolutely ridiculous in 2013.
But if the Prime Minister was here, and I'm putting words in his mouth, my apologies, he would argue that the nation is in a state and that they're doing the best that they can to try and resolve that. How do we get down to those grassroots level, to those people who, like the man who walked all that way to Eccles and back?
Well, I think the answer to the question, you're right. We're in economic turmoil. We've got no growth. It's very, very difficult to see where we go. But the obverse of that, of course, is that if we don't do something, then the country will suffer greatly. And we do have to keep people connected. We have to all be in this together. And that's not about, you know, all paying our 5% or 7%. It's actually about being connected to our nation. And somehow we've got to develop that understanding. I do think that we could utilise the resources that we've got in a better way. I think there are, you know, avenues that we could explore about sharing things better than we do, because quite often organisations set up with the greatest of intent, but we actually sometimes, like going into an exam room, we actually put our arm around our exam paper and we're not going to share with anybody. And organisations do this as well, and in the voluntary community sector they do this, in the faith sector they do it right across the board. And we have to really come together with a common aim to reduce poverty, and we have to make sure that this report and its recommendations don't gather dust for the next, you know, however long, 60, 100 years, because there's been a whole multitude of commissions across Greater Manchester in its time, and we've got to make sure that this one actually meets the needs of the people that we need to serve. Adrian,
you work with other faith-based charities in Manchester. How are they coping?
The picture would be very similar. Facing the obvious things that I guess every household is feeling at the moment. So we face increase in running costs. We know, and I guess every listener knows, their fuel bills are going up, their food bills are going up. So other faith-based charities and organisations are facing increase in running costs, increase in demand, and as I talk to others, that's what they're meeting every single day. With that, either donations or giving, because of the squeeze on all of our pockets, are not growing with that, with those increases. And I guess our appeal to people of faith and good heart is to give in ways that you've not given before. That obvious example of Christ, that sacrificial giving.
Gentlemen, please stay with us. We'll continue this after a piece of music and our traffic.
BBC Radio Manchester.
Mike Shaft.
BBC Radio Manchester.
Yes, it is. And my guest, as I say in the studio, Colin Barson, Parish Development Officer for the Manchester Diocese, who was one of the commissioners on this report, and Adrian Nottingham, the CEO of the Mustard Tree. Gentlemen, what has become of the big society? Should we be doing more, or was it always never going to happen?
I think, Mike, from my point of view, as I think I mentioned to you before, that I did a presentation on the Big Society in 2010, just after David Cameron launched it, and I called it Into the Void, and I think I was proved right. I think, you know, it is a void in respect to what he expected to come of it. I would say, on the positive side, the Big Society is operating all around us. Not as much as we might like, but churches and the charity and voluntary community sector are operating. They are doing a good job with the people that they're there to serve. So it is happening. What we need to do is ensure that if we want to connect to society, we have to build on that. That doesn't come free. It takes people resources to do that, but it also takes people to have a mindset change and I said before, I think about the gold dust I'd like to be sprinkled would be around empathy and people learning to really understand another person's perspective, but not just sympathy plus, but real empathy. I think if we had that, I think it would start changing our mindsets and we would start giving more. There's a lot of giving takes place. There's no doubt about it. There's a lot of people who are connected out there doing some really great work. Mustard Tree do great work. There's the Boaz Trust, there's Fair Share, etc. They're really good organisations doing a lot of good work, but we need to support them. But we also need to get more and more people involved in this to enable the big society to be developed. I'm not sure that label sticks anymore. I think we have to have a new one.
How do we change the thinking, Adrian? Because this could happen to any of us.
Yeah.
This could happen to any of us who go into work one day and we're told the job's finished.
You've absolutely right. I think everybody needs to sit down and think that one through, that this could happen to any of us. There, but by the grace of God go I. And some of the people that we deal with would sit here and would tell you their story, and it would sound like your story, and it would sound like my story, and then something happened. A relationship breakdown, a loss of a job, illness, anything that could happen to any one of us, and the spiral began. The debt, the isolation, and the vulnerability. So yes, I think we all need to think this one through. Do you know, on the grassroots level, every day we have people contacting us and saying, how can we help? And we're so grateful and blessed by that. So we have different companies and organisations contact us, and those things are great. But on a strategic level, at a time when Greater Manchester has a city deal, and we know investment, we know there's a great ability in Greater Manchester to make money, to cause growth. But at strategic level, the thinking does need to change. And every policy decision and every growth initiative, one thing I would ask is that we remember the poor. That in all of those plans, we think about the most vulnerable in our society, and we think of how our plans will affect them. And they, as Colin has said, are included in the conversation, and so that we make sure that growth that will come to this area, and we already see it, does affect the most vulnerable of society. Because at the moment, it's missing them, and they are struggling more and more, and the numbers of vulnerable are increasing.
Well, Colin Barson, Parish Development Officer for Manchester Diocese, and Adrian Nottingham, CEO of the Mustard Tree, can I thank you very much indeed for being with us this morning.